Let's get started. So hi everybody, for all those who've just joined us, I'm Jenny Smith and I chair this session on behalf of Stroud District Green Party. Today we are hosting a panel of 4 experts from around the country, and we are talking about valley protectors. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel after the session. So if anyone missed it, please feel free to share it. If you've got any questions or if you're having any trouble, then please use the chat function to get in touch. You can send it straight to Stroud District Green Party. Or if you've got a question that you'd like posed into the panel at the end of the session, then feel free to drop it in there and I will keep an eye on that and have a look. So our guest host for today is Nicola Cutcher. Nicola is a member of the Friends of Upper Wye and a producer of a forthcoming live documentary, Rivercide, which will be presented by George Monbiot and directed by Franny Armstrong, which we're all very excited for. So if everybody except our speakers could mute themselves and turn their cameras off, and enjoy the session. And Nicola, if you can unmute, and I'll hand over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jenny. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Nicola Cutcher. I'm a journalist, and as Jenny said, yeah, I'm the producer of Rivercide, which is a documentary all about river pollution that is going to go out live later this year. It was meant to be going out in May, but I think we're now delaying till probably July because COVID lockdown has made it harder to do research on the ground. And George Monbiot, the Guardian columnist and the presenter of our documentary, has had COVID over Christmas and he's kind of in recovery now. So he wanted a bit more time. Plus lockdown means he's homeschooling his kids. Everything else is going wrong. So yeah, like everybody else, we're just taking things a bit slowly and hoping then we can broadcast live. Oh, Franny's joining us, obviously. Franny's the director of Riverside. She's listening in to the talk today. Yeah, so the idea of Riverside is it's a live investigative documentary. So we don't know if something just like this has been done before or not, but George and Franny and me all know that rivers are really in crisis in our country at the moment, as I'm sure many of you know if you're joining this today. You know, they fail the kind of environmental agency tests on pollution. Every river monitored in England is polluted. So it's pretty shocking. And we've got a whole range of factors going on at the same time. So we've got agricultural pollution, we've got sewage pollution, we've got industrial pollution, we've got road runoff. There's all these different pollutants entering our watercourses, and just getting worse and worse. You know, the monitoring of our rivers is getting cut back and back. So our environmental agencies are being stripped back. Natural Resources Wales, Environmental England, Natural England, all of these bodies are being cut back and they're doing less and less monitoring. So basically the idea with Riverside is we're trying to connect with community groups around the country to highlight different kind of examples of river pollution across the UK, and also what we can all do to try and clean our rivers up and work together as communities to make things better. So through my research for Riverside, I've been meeting lots of amazing activists. So I'm delighted to have an opportunity outside of Riverside to bring some of them together to have a conversation which will probably feed into Riverside and all of the work that groups are doing around the country. So I'll introduce the other speakers in a moment. I also just wanted to mention that as well as doing Riverside, I'm part of this group called Friends of the Upper Wye, which formed because I live near the River Wye in Herefordshire, and earlier last year in the summer there was a lot of press around the fact that the algal blooms on the River Wye were really terrible. So we had terrible algal blooms which were then starving the river of light and oxygen, this eutrophication, which means that the ranunculus, the kind of plant on the bottom of the river, is just dying out because it's not getting enough light and oxygen. And that's you know the ground of the ecosystem. So everything else is feeding off that. So we're basically killing the river from the bottom up. And the Wye and Usk Foundation, who are the local Rivers Trust, put out a press release. And then I was part of a group with lots of other amazing local people in Herefordshire and Powys who got together and said, what are we going to do? This is our river that's dying, and on a pretty short time frame. So we've made this group called Friends of the Upper Wye. It's very new, but we're looking at doing citizen science testing along the river, because essentially they think the main thing driving the algal blooms is phosphates, maybe nitrates, but phosphates and nitrates mainly from agricultural pollution, because on the Wye it's a very agricultural area. There's a lot of farming, there's a lot of intensive farming units, so a lot of intensive livestock, a lot of intensive poultry units, and all of that means a lot of manure being spread on the land around here and running into the rivers. And we've also got sewage treatment works and other issues. So, but essentially nobody knows exactly how much is being contributed, because no one's really monitoring. So the Environmental Agency and Natural Resources Wales only monitor the main rivers 4 times a year. So a few spots on the main river 4 times a year is nothing to understand exactly where the pollution's coming in, when, identify hotspots. None of that data is being collected. Whereas we know lots of people that live next to rivers who, even in lockdown or any situation, can test the water near the bottom of their garden regularly. So we're just seeking funding at the moment to basically do a mass citizen science phosphate monitoring for at least a year, and get local people monitoring at least twice a week. So it would be an amazing amount more data than we have now, and that would help us identify where the problems are on the river. And then the hand-in-hand part of that is, some of the group went, all the science is great, but what about our souls? What do we do about how we feel about the river? And so there's now a sister arts project going to launch called Lift the River, which is about raising the kind of cultural importance of the river in our life and celebrating what the rivers mean to us. And so that arts project is going to work hand in hand with the science project. So yeah, that's what we're doing on the Wye, but there are lots of other groups along the Wye doing different work as well. And obviously the Wye and Us Foundation are the Rivers Trust here. But one thing I'd say, which I've learned from the research so far and my experiences locally, is that there is a need for community groups as well as Rivers Trusts, because the Rivers Trusts so often are often getting funding to work with farmers very constructively, or the water companies or anyone else, to input projects. So particularly with farmers, if they seem to be too critical of certain farming practices, that can really compromise their relationship to then deliver improvements on farms. So they tend to be quite curtailed in what they can say. And that just shows us on the Wye that there was a real place for community members that don't have those interests and conflicts to be able to stand up and say, this is what the data says, and it may be inconvenient, but we've got to work together to find a solution, because everyone wants a healthy river. And maybe we can be more vocal about some of the problems than some of the other agencies that already exist. Anyway, that's more than enough from me. I'll give you a brief outline of some of our speakers, and then we'll go to them, because we've got Ashley Smith from Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, who is one of the best minds I've found yet at explaining the issues with sewage pollution in the UK. And Ashley's prepared a presentation for us to explain sewage pollution specifically. And then we've got Karen Shackleton from Ilkley Clean River Group, who I'm really excited is here as well, because Ilkley Clean River Group have made history by basically making a stretch of the River Wharfe the first river in the UK to be granted bathing water status. So I'm really hoping Karen will tell us about her journey from the beginning of when she first heard about some sewage pollution to all the way through to that amazing campaign win, which has really set a precedent for the country. And Karen, and they also had a citizen science project. So I hope Karen will talk a bit about that. And then finally, we've got Paul Powlesland, who is a really inspirational barrister. He's a barrister and a doer, so he'll tell his own story, but he represented lots of environmental activists before now, including the Sheffield tree protesters. And he has great experience of working with community groups, but also he's proactive. So he set up the River Roading Trust and Friends of the River Roading to help protect his local river. And in fact, it was a conversation with Paul that I had for an article I wrote about the rights of rivers and the rights of nature, which really set me on this journey of thinking about the Friends of the Upper Wye and joining with other local people. So I'm so glad that Paul, who inspired me, is here to inspire everybody else. But hopefully that makes sense. But let's start with Ash, who will tell us a bit about sewage pollution.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I share my screen then? Okay, is that working?
Yep, perfect.
Lovely. Okay, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes to explain this thing. Now, it's a massive subject, so I'm calling it a swift paddle in the shallow end. Now, if anyone wants to know more about this, contact us on the website. There'll be some people on this presentation that will know far more about this than I do, and there'll be some people who this will be relatively new to. So I'm trying to cater for everybody. So I'm going to talk about what sewage pollution is, how it happens, why it happens, why it's so bad and it's getting worse, and what you can do about it. So what is it? Well, think about what you put into your sinks, toilets, showers, baths, and wherever. And think about what you buy from the supermarkets and what that actually looks like, that great pile of chemicals, the human waste, the hormones, the drugs that we take that pass through our bodies, bacteria, viruses, the trade waste that the sewage industry has to deal with, microplastics. And appreciate this is treated in a very basic way. Now, some of these things are labeled in this way: harmful to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. That's a common enough label that you'll be able to find if you get bored when you're in a supermarket next time. That is just a bizarre thing to have labeled, isn't it? In the 21st century, we're actually putting that problem into our water cycle. Light touch regulation applies, and we know what that means. Pretty much the industry can get away with what it wants to until the wheel comes off in a major, spectacular fashion. So how does it happen? All that stuff goes down out of your house and it heads its way to the sewage works, which this is an example of a good example, because in the middle there you can see what is a relatively modern way of treating it, which is activated sludge, where they add oxygen, that is air, to the sewage to feed the bacteria that do the work on certain parts of that mixture. And then down the bottom, you can see these two slightly more old-fashioned tanks, which are still commonly used, which are filter beds, where you may have seen these things. If you've seen the sewage works, you'll see an arm spinning around, spraying liquid onto some stones. And at the top, those two empty tanks, they're actually used as the storm arrangement for extra capacity in the event of bad weather. Now, that will just take place in roughly, it's kind of in at one end and out at the other. And the reality is it will come out the other end between 6 and 8 hours later. So you might wonder, as I do, how much can actually happen to that stuff in that time. And this is how it will appear at a river. And this is where it becomes so bizarre and ironic, because on the left-hand side there, you've got the treated sewage effluent coming out of a sewage works, quite a small sewage works there. But a great example because it shows the two things together. And on the right-hand side, that is the overflow, the thing that's supposed to be used in exceptional circumstances, untreated sewage, often screened of the rags. That is the stuff that people throw down the toilet that they shouldn't do, wet wipes and all the other, other stuff that goes in there. That is untreated sewage running in next to that treated effluent, which, as we go into this a little bit further, you'll realize the irony and how bizarre it is that this is allowed. Treated effluent, untreated sewage going into a river next to each other. Now, why does it happen? Well, the water industry is, it comprises in England of about 9 major water utilities, and then you've got Wales. England's regulated by the Environment Agency. Wales has got, I forgot the name of it. Anyway, it's the Welsh one. So now there's the main problem. The water utilities are monopolies. Now, of course, that means as a business, what will a monopoly do to you? If you can't go to somebody else, it will give you the worst possible service that it thinks it can get away with and make the most money out of it. If it's a profit-making business, that's the raw model of a business. Now, everyone can tell me about how great their companies are, and they're not like that. But at the heart of that model and the heart of that system, that's what prevails. It's supposedly a regulated industry. I put that in inverted commas because our experience and WASP investigates the industry and the regulation forensically and looks very, very hard with some very sophisticated data analysis And to call that regulated is actually quite ludicrous. The industry does pretty much what it wants to do. Ofwat is the financial regulator and will set the fees. It will decide how much the customer can be charged. And the reality is they've been very focused on low bills, and they don't like to give lots of money to the water industry, in my opinion, because they had such a seriously bad experience with companies like Thames Water, who ran rings around them by messing around with their financial arrangements, so that many layers of companies were built on top of the actual water company that are not regulated, and were used to move money around to bring in debt and generally frighten Ofwat by swifting away large amounts of money to shareholders and delivering a very limited service. So they responded to that, in my opinion, by keeping bills low. And you look at what you pay for other things in your life, and look at what you pay for all of your water and all of your sewage in the 21st century, and you realize why you're getting a pretty poor service. The Environment Agency, it monitors, I say that, yes, okay, it will have a grip of certain parts of what the industry does. It issues permits for polluting, basically, to allow effluent to go into rivers, but it will only look at things like suspended solids, biochemical oxygen demand, and ammonia, sometimes phosphates. So a very basic view of what goes in when you compare it against that hugely complex chemical cocktail that I indicated to you right at the beginning. So how's it all working? Well, 14% of rivers in England are now in good ecological condition. That's numbers fallen over the years. So there you go. That's how well that's working. It's an utter disaster. It's a system failure. Polluting is profitable and very easily done, very hard to stop if you're going to conduct it in the way that it's been done. And I'd just like to dispel this myth, because you'll keep hearing it whenever there's a program about sewage spilling. The water industry has always said untreated sewage is only spilled in exceptional circumstances to prevent it backing up into people's homes. Rubbish. It happens because the infrastructure has been allowed to be lacking and has never been addressed. I don't know if they expected the thing to heal itself over the years. They keep complaining about its Victorian infrastructure, or it's built in the 70s or whenever, and now it's 30 years older than when they took it over. And without investing money in it and doing something about it, it's only going to get worse, as anybody who owns a house or a car or anything will know. So forget that idea. That's not the truth. It's about making money, and that's why it can change very easily. And why is it so bad and getting worse? Well, I would say it is entirely because the whole thing, the whole system of regulation and informing the ministers, DEFRA, Ofwat, and everybody is based on a complete false picture presented to them by inadequate and totally inaccurate evidence and data collected by the Environment Agency. And I'm going to give you just a very small example of that here. This is the annual report that gets dished out for Ofwat to see how well the water industry is doing. And this is done by the Environment Agency. So I'm going to take Thames Water, for example, and just look at this part here. This is about discharge permit compliance. And if you look at Thames Water, they've got 99.7% compliance, which sounds great, doesn't it? They get 3 stars out of 4 on their TripAdvisor rating. So that sounds pretty wonderful. But let's look really at the reality. Now, this is based on an article that was done by The Guardian, who, and there are 2 issues here. One is the inaccuracy and the kind of poor response that Thames Water gave to The Guardian, and the lack of transparency that they gave them. But it's also the huge numbers of hours of spilling untreated sewage that were used to get that 99.7%. So this was known to the agency, Environment Agency, and kept from the public. And I should have said at the beginning, we've got lots of good friends in the agency and in Thames Water, of good people trying to do a good job. But the agency itself and the business itself, we're very highly critical of. So the reality wasn't that Thames Water in 2019 spilt 12,749 hours of untreated sewage. They spilt 109,000 hours, quite a lot of difference there. The Environment Agency knew those figures were wrongly reported, and they didn't mention that. We had to drag this out. It didn't happen on 1,573 occasions. It happened on 9,319 occasions. So there you've got this ridiculous situation where the industry has shown itself to be able to produce permit compliance at sewage works. But as you saw at the beginning, they do it by complying with the effluent, which was on the left side of that photograph, treated effluent coming in, and on the right side, to maintain that, they were dumping the sewage that they couldn't deal with. And that is the fundamental flaw, one of them, in the way that this functions. And if you want to look at how things are in your area, type into Google, is my river fit to play in? It's a Rivers Trust map. It's an interactive thing. It's layered, and you can find where you live, and you can click on the sewage works nearby. So I've done Stroud, and in Stroud in 2019, Stroud Sewage Works, that spilled untreated sewage 141 times for a total of 1,823 hours into the River Frome or Froome. I'm not sure, because someone's going to tell me I've got that wrong either way. So that is a shocker. That's a pretty bad result. And now, what does that look like actually? So this is Witney Sewage Works that spilled last winter for about almost 4 months. So this is untreated sewage pouring out into the Colwell Brook, which then flows into the River Windrush. And that is pretty much coming out 24 hours a day. There's no excuse for that being an exceptional circumstance. It happens because groundwater leaks into the system. A whole other presentation, so I won't go on to that. And then the effect of that, this is how this Colwell Brook looked for most of that time. This is a weed bed, by the way, completely covered in sewage fungus, and it's clear this day because the sewage has stopped flowing over it, but that's what's going on underneath it. And as I've said in that, that's flourishing fungus. And inside, sorry, that's the same thing. This is now at the back end of an event, which I filmed just the other day. And you can see the sewage fungus coating the gravel of the bed of the river, smothering all of the invertebrate life. The fish and invertebrates are supposed to live in this. And that weed bed is just recovering, but you can see that is what covered it and continues to cover it, and will soon come back. So what can you do about it? Well, you can do as much as you want, basically. And if you're interested in doing more and setting up your own group, and I think it's a great merit in unfettered community groups doing things, and we can really help you kickstart anything by giving you a leg up with the knowledge. There's our website detail. And you can also contact your MP via the Surfers Against Sewage website, because they've got that link then that will help you write a letter to your MP to try to encourage them to join Philip Dunn's private members bill to bring in effective legislation. Because you don't have to have this. This is the River Windrush near to where I live in 2020. And that's what it was like in 2009. And we can get that back. And that's what we're determined to do. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ash. That's brilliant. And yeah, well, now can we go to Karen? Because Karen's got a very personal story about how her group have responded to sewage pollution up in Ilkley. Just unmute, Karen.
Oh, there we go. Typical Zoom. I'm Karen Shackleton from Ilkley Clean River Group. We started off with the local fisherman, instead of catching fish on his fishing line, was catching sanitary products, condoms, and these wet wipes that people really should not be flushing down the toilets in the first place. If it's anything flushable, only pee, paper and poo should be flushed down the loo. And I went and had a look at what was going on after talking to the fishermen. And what we found was the sewage was just shooting out of the untreated CSO, which is a combined sewage overflow outlet that Ashley showed you. And it was coming out with such force that it was going from one end of the river to the other and as far down as the eye could see with sewage. And this carried on for a whole week. So what I did was I went and took some photographs of all the sanitary towels and everything that were remaining. And I posted them on our local Facebook site, Ilkley Chat. And it just went ballistic. People were absolutely horrified. The children were playing on the beach where there were all these sanitary products around. And it was an absolute horror. So I did that on Ilkley Chat, and then obviously the local news got involved. I formed a group which consisted of me, Steve Fairburn, Becky Malby, who was a great campaigner, and Professor Rick Batterby, who's a water ecologist. And we held some town meetings and pulled in the Environment Agency in Yorkshire Water. And what you have to remember is water companies are there to make a profit. And if the Environment Agency and the regulators are letting them get away with saving money by tipping raw sewage into the river, they're only going to do what they're required to do by the regulators. So our issue really was with the regulators. And when the regulators came into the town meeting, they said it's having no ecological impact on the river. So there's nothing to do here. So obviously we didn't accept that. And so we set up a citizen science project with funding from the local council to see what was actually going on in the rivers. And we actually got the information from the Environment Agency from their own testings, which actually did show quite significant levels of pollution. And so the Environment Agency said it's having no ecological impact on the river, nothing to see here, move on. So we said, well, what's happening is the untreated sewage should only be coming out in periods of extreme and prolonged rainfall conditions as set out by the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. This isn't happening. This is happening after 20 minutes of normal everyday rain. And we said, obviously, the permit needs increasing because at the moment it's allowing the untreated sewage to go in the river after such a low level of rainfall, which is issued by the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency then said, we can't increase the permit because the water company aren't breaking the permit, which we said, well, they're not breaking the permit because it's set so low, they're hardly treating the sewage. So that was another dead end. So the only way that we decided we could get action on cleaning up the river was to apply for bathing water status, which would mean the Environment Agency would have to regularly monitor the E. coli levels in the river and make sure that it's reaching a safe level for people to swim in, because in Ilkley, we've got Ilkley Moor, we're a spa town, we're right on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales National Park. So we are, quite a tourist town, and people do come to swim and play in the river, as do all the locals. So if it wasn't going to have any ecological impact on the river, then obviously it's a health hazard. And we were getting a lot of people contacting us saying they'd been made very poorly after swimming in the river, with some very seriously ill after going in the river. So we decided to do that. And it's taken us a year. We had over 100 volunteers counting over the last year. People swimming, playing, paddling in the river. And we had to do that 2 or 3 times a week throughout the whole summer of the months. And we counted on one day up to 1,700 people paddling and playing in the river, which could potentially be contaminated by raw sewage. So we had to ask for permission from the landowner, Bradford Council. We had to inform DEFRA of plans to do it. And fortunately, they agreed to do it. So now we will get an upgrade to Ilkley sewage treatment works and upstream at Addingham as well. And this would set the bar for other people now to be able to apply. And that was our I suppose our ambition really, is that if we can get this designation, then that sets the bar for other people to apply for the same thing, and therefore other people can apply to clean their rivers up as well. And we're going to do, Ilkley Clean River are going to do a webinar on how we did it and what you need to do yourselves to apply for this designation, and you'll find that on our Twitter account, or you can go and look on our website, Ilkley Clean River Group. And on top of that, we also did a water testing programme called the Upper Wye. This was in conjunction with the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust, and because of the amount of interest we'd attracted through this, we had volunteers right from the source of the wharf right down to the ooze, and all the communities got together, and we tested the whole river on a single day for water quality to identify sources of pollution along the whole length of the wharf. And quite disturbingly, there wasn't a single place where most people would swim and bathe that you could actually, that was safe for bathers. So there's a lot of work to be done. And Yorkshire Water have committed to reducing the amount of sewage into the river by 20%. Now, when we brought the Environment Agency into one of our town meetings, they claimed that it was going in about 40 times the number of discharges at Ilkley, and then they came back to say it was 36 times. And then when we went and wrote to them for a Freedom of Information request from Yorkshire Water, it was actually over 100 times, and it hadn't been under 70 discharges within the last 10 years. And in fact, we have about 114 days worth of sewage going into our rivers untreated last year. So if they reduce that by 20%, that's only going to take it down to about 90 days worth of sewage going into the river. So obviously there's still a lot of work to be done there to get it down to exceptional circumstances, because 90 days of sewage in our opinion, it isn't exceptional circumstances. So yeah, that's what we've done really. I don't know what else we can do really.
Karen, that was brilliant. And the good thing is after Paul's spoken as well, we'll have time for questions, and I'm sure people will have questions for you. And I've seen on the chat while we're talking that we've got great people contributing, including Michelle Walker from the Rivers Trust, and she's pointing out they're developing a kind of bathing water knowledge Slack group to share information as well. So anyway, I'm sure people are following the chat, but just to say there's lots of good suggestions in the chat as well. Thank you very much, Karen. And yeah, let's go to Paul and hear a bit about his amazing work.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from my boat on the River Roding in East London, actually still in my COVID quarantine. Yeah, it's actually you're probably the first person I've spoken to in quite a few, first people I've spoken to in quite a few days. I want to talk a bit about rivers and the rights of nature. And I first got involved in the rights of nature through my work with the Sheffield tree protesters. So I, through slightly random ways, ended up representing them, and then through that experience went on to set up Lawyers for Nature, which tries to represent the natural world and campaign for rights of nature. So in relation to rivers, that effectively means that I believe, and increasing numbers of people believe, that rivers should have legal rights and legal standing. So obviously human beings have that, so you can bring law cases and you can sue and be sued basically.
so much easier to live in it and function in it. Feel it.
Oh, so
If it was
some interference. Could someone mute?
Oh, if we just keep everyone on mute while we've got the presentations, please. Thanks.
So humans can sue and be sued, but also non-human beings can as well. So, for instance, companies are legal persons and have legal rights, which is a strange contrast, and perhaps it's very indicative of the current system we have, that entirely fictional entities, which we basically made up in the 19th century, which are companies, have legal standing and legal rights, whereas natural entities like trees, like rivers, have nothing at all. And I believe that lack of legal rights and legal standing for nature is really at the heart of much of the destruction that we see today. I mean, obviously there are regulations and legal regulations that apply to, for instance, rivers and indeed trees. So you have tree protection orders, or you have wastewater regulations, or you have regulations as to what farmers can put into rivers and that kind of thing. But as we've seen in the other presentations, where nature lacks legal rights and standing, these are very hard to enforce. And also they're usually from a perspective of human beings. So we don't want to put sewage into rivers because then it's not nice for us to swim in, which obviously is true. But actually, perhaps we should go further and say, well, actually, what does the river want? What does the river need? And actually, should it have rights that are beyond human beings' desires for it? Now, when people in this country hear about the idea of giving rights for nature, their first reaction is a bit mad. And indeed, a barrister colleague of mine in my old chambers, who was actually the lead counsel for Southern Water, one of the most egregious polluters, looked at me with abject horror when I suggested that nature should have rights, because it's mad. It seems very unrealistic, but it is actually happening in many parts of the world. So there are a number of South American countries that have put rights of nature into their constitution. On a local level, there's many towns, particularly in America, that are giving rights to their lakes and rivers. The best example for this country, or the best comparator, is a river in New Zealand called the Whanguini River, which was given rights in 2017. And that's particularly useful because New Zealand is one of the closest legal jurisdictions to ours. They pretty much follow most of our system of law because of the colonial connections that we have with them. And so, frankly, if New Zealand can do it, we could do it too. But the key question is, why are we very unlikely to do it when New Zealand did? And that answer, of course, is because in New Zealand, the impetus, in fact, the entire reasoning for their river getting rights was because of the insistence of that by the Maori people. And actually the treaty, the Act of Parliament giving rights to the river was part of the peace settlement between the Crown and the Maori people. And that really highlights the fact that around the world, by and large, calls for rights of nature come from Indigenous peoples, largely. Not always, but largely, because they have not lost their connection to the natural world in the way that many people in the West have. And they've also never lost that fundamental truth that nature is sacred and that we are part of nature and nature is part of us, and that we will not survive without nature and vice versa. And so it was the Maori people in New Zealand that really led to the passing of that act. So, of course, that leads to a bit of a problem in this country because, unfortunately, we don't have an Indigenous people in this country anymore. And we lost our connection to the land so long ago. There is who is there to fight for that rights of nature? And of course, the answer then must become, I suppose, looking around the room, us. We must take that role. And actually, this was the conversation that I had with Nicola back in earlier this summer, when I had my feet dangling in the River Wye, chatting to her about an article about rights of nature, and saying that actually, well, if I could choose between having a Rights of Rivers Act 2021, but with no local groups or no government departments to enforce that act, or choose to have the current situation but with a strong vocal local group on every single river in the country fighting for the rights of rivers, I would definitely choose the latter. Which is also convenient because we're not going to get a Rights of Rivers Act anytime soon. We can't even get Parliament to probably, I mean, I've seen some of the chat already about Philip Dunn's bill. Obviously it should pass, but probably won't. We can't even get Parliament to stop pouring shit into our rivers. So maybe getting them to give the rights to those rivers is pretty far off. But coming to the crescendo on this, what is very possible, in fact, not just possible, it's completely doable. Tomorrow, we could have a group on every single river in the country of local people who are fighting for the rights of that river, and trying to enforce the rights of their local river as best they can, using the current legal framework and political activism. And that's why I think this is such an important thing. It's both really practical, but also very doable. It can happen right away, and it's very empowering. As a lawyer who's into rights of nature, even I can't do a huge amount given the current legal framework, but for a lot of people it's very disempowering, saying just, okay, well, you can write to your MP, you can sign a petition, but what can you actually what can you actually do? And here is that answer, which I realize I'm also slightly running out of time, so I may have to take some of your questions on this, but this then turns to, as well as my role in Lawyers for Nature, what I do in a practical sense. So I've lived on a boat for the last 9 years, and 4 years ago I found the third largest river in London was basically unused, unloved, no one really looking after it. And so I moved there by myself and became the first person ever to live on the river, and founded a community of boaters to live on the river and take care of it. So we've now got 7 boats here and a small community, and we all pay normally to live on a boat you have to pay a license fee, but normally you pay it to Canal and River Trust, and then they basically spend it all on senior staff salaries. Slight exaggeration, but not by much. So we do the same. We charge a license fee, but that then goes directly back into the river. Every boater here has a volunteer hours, so 12 hours a month to volunteer to look after the river as well. And then since then we founded the River Roading Trust to kind of put that on a more permanent basis, and it's happening. And really the community is the wellspring of that change. Like having a group of people who are local to a river and are there on the ground, if not every day, then most of the time, just seeing what's happening and doing something about it is so important, and is really the other thing that's really interesting as well is we set up a Facebook group called Friends of the River Roading, which started off with about me and 20 mates, I think. And now it's got over 1,000 people in it. And what's very interesting about that group is just having the group as a place that people talk about the river and post things about it, and even just post pictures of their walk or a duck they saw. It creates an energy that the river is taken care of and loved, and other people then start manifesting that energy. So people who are not even involved in the trust at all will just post a picture saying, oh, I was going for a walk and I did all this litter picking, or I really like this bit of the roading, this means a lot to me. That kind of stuff really matters, and it's now gone from being a river that really no one cared about to being a place where there's something happening, where people clearly care about nature and are beginning to look after the rights of this river. And that change is quite magical. And as I say, it's something that we can all do. I can answer, because I think I'm already over my time, or at least getting there. I can answer more in the questions about what other practical things you can do in terms of trying to uphold the rights of the river. we do lots of things like tree planting, litter picking, and also trying to begin to deal with the sewage problems that we have here. But the last thing I'd like to end on, I suppose, is a slightly more hippie note, I suppose, which, given I'm talking to the Stroud Green Party, should not be unwelcome. I see Jenny's agreeing with that. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Indigenous people are the ones often who are upholding the rights of nature, and that stems from their sense of their belief that nature is sacred, and I really believe that too. And actually going to your river and beginning to treat it as a sacred thing is I think an important part of this. And if that's too much for you, even just going to your river and spending time with it actually matters. You know, people will only love that which they know, and eventually will protect that which they love. And I think that those steps is often a missed part of this. And the more people that we can connect with nature, the more people begin to see it as sacred. And the more people who love their local river, I believe the more people will protect it and stand up for its rights. And that's also an important part of these local groups, is fostering that connection, that love, and ultimately, if you're willing to make that jump to being a bit more hippie, that sense of sacredness. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was so inspiring. That was a brilliant note to end the discussions on. And yeah, well, I'll hand over to Jenny, because Jenny is accomplished at chairing these kind of Q&As.
Well, there's so much going on in the chat. So we've got loads of comments, loads of people who are obviously really interested in this subject and sharing some of their expertise as well. I will try and cherry pick some of the ones that I think will inspire an interesting conversation. So one of them, which I know obviously is sort of an issue very close to all our hearts because of Brexit, is around the Water Treatment Directive. And sorry, I should have invited the person to ask this question who asked it. Just going to try and find them quickly. It's Jan Metcalf. Jan Metcalf, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and sorry, I've almost ruined your question, but feel free to ask it to the panel.
I'd looked at the Philip Dunn the debate in the House on water treatment, and one of the questions that one of the MPs asked was about the wastewater treatment directive and what would happen now we'd left the EU. The government spokesman didn't give an answer, and that's why I'm raising the question. I don't know whether anybody here tonight can answer that.
No, yeah, no, I mean, a very interesting question. Nicola, I don't know, or if any of the panelists want to come in, then put your hands up, okay?
Oh yeah, Karen's got her hand up, and so let's go to Karen, and then let's go to Karen.
Okay.
Okay, well, as we came out of Brexit, the government said they would keep all the EU regulation in place until they brought out their own regulation, or they would carry on using that until that was changed effectively. Now, I've just noticed on Twitter that Sir James Bevan, head of the Environment Agency, has just said, we don't really need all this red tape and regulation. So, you know, we could really do away with it, which then leaves a whole big free-for-all for these water companies to just run riot and basically do what they do, and just carry on pouring sewage into the rivers to use them as open sewers to save money. So that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, nightmare. I think that is the fear for a lot of us, sort of across the board, with not just regulations protecting our waters and rivers, but you know, agriculture. I mean, the bee pesticides we've just seen have come out as well. So there's lots of things we need to consider. I guess one thing that we can do, Jan, is always, I know writing to your MP can sometimes feel powerless, but I think that we've just got to keep doing these things, keep having these conversations. Nick Reed has got his hand up. Are you coming in on this subject, Nick?
I'd like to very much.
Yeah, please do.
It's a major part of my life. I spent 30 years running a fish farm on the Little Avon in Gloucestershire. And we were sampled every month. They turned up when they wanted to, so we couldn't control that. But we managed over 30 years to stay friends with the Environment Agency and their predecessors. I'm absolutely delighted at what I've been hearing this evening, which was all very strange to me. I had no idea just how dreadful it all was. But there's lots of organizations who would join with us to fight to get things right. There's the Fisheries Trust, there's the fishermen's groups, and certainly when I came to Gloucestershire, the river that I then farmed on for 30 years had been used as a fishery pretty well all the way down. So I dare say, if one looks into it, the situation has got progressively worse. Our population has risen. We will not have been keeping up with building better and better water treatments. So there's a huge amount that can be done, and I would very much like to be a part of it.
Thanks so much, Nick. That's amazing to hear that you've been inspired by the conversations that we've had here, and also that you've got some fantastic expertise that I'm sure will come in handy in these kinds of conversations. We hope that everybody on the call today is inspired to get involved and, you know, create your own friends of your local river, or find one that's already going. I think we've had some links in the chat where that information is available. Just to say and answer, all of the links that go into the chat will go onto the YouTube channel along with the recording of this session, so people can access those after the fact. Simon, as we've just been... Oh, sorry, go on.
Can I add something into the regulator sort of argument that people are talking about? You know, yeah. Obviously that is really important, and as a barrister, I should say, there is obviously a real role for parliamentary lobbying and legal shenanigans and the regulators, all that kind of stuff. But let us not forget as well, and this is putting my hothead hat on now, that actually there's also a role for direct action in this, and that actually if they refuse to listen, eventually that's what needs to take place. We're living in the times of XR, and there are many people all around the country who are up for peaceful direct action in support of the environment. And if our regulators fail to stop putting shit into our rivers, then eventually we should maybe do something about that. I've always thought actually that, you know, I might, again, I at the moment on the roading, we're trying to work with Thames Water, but eventually if they keep pouring crap into my river, I just want to take a bucket of it and take it to the head of Thames Water's house and be like, you put this into my house, why should I not throw this bucket all over yours? Give me a good reason, and then film that. You know, I probably won't throw poo at his house, but even just the suggestion that I might on film is actually makes quite a good point. And that's just one example, because we think of many other imaginative actions, shutting down depots, water company depots, head offices, all that kind of stuff, to actually begin to like make the solid point that this is no longer acceptable. So I'd like to kind of push that radical agenda as well.
Absolutely. Well, you're talking to the right group of people, if I'm honest. Stroud is the birthplace of some of these kinds of things. So I'm sure we've got lots of people who would love to get involved in that kind of thing. Okay, going back to the questions. Simon Pickering, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question about salmon. I know it's particularly about the River Wye, but I think following on from Nick's comment around fishing, it might be quite a good time to come in.
Well, yes, it was more. I think it's partly been answered in the chat, really. In the salmon, whatever you think about it, it's a very wealthy salmon fishery there, and the fish are declining very dramatically. And there's lots of lords and people go fishing there. So it just strikes me that actually getting the rich and powerful on board might be really helpful in that one. I think that's really important. I also asked the second question, I'm being cheeky here. I said, should we be talking about repollution in terms of the rivers were incredibly dirty during the Industrial Revolution. And then we had water boards and then they were bloody privatised. And, you know, so there's a sudden change in having the rivers getting cleaner. And then after privatisation, their water quality has declined. So that's a question to the panel. Should we be talking about repollution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because we have this conversation with Riverside, but it's easy to say, we want to return our rivers to a pristine state. But of course, yeah, exactly. The Industrial Revolution, they were not in a pristine state. There were lots of black rivers in Wales from industrial pollution. So of course, it has been worse in some ways, but the problems are different now. You know, we have a lot more chemicals, I think, going into rivers generally. We've got more road runoff going into rivers, which is something we've barely touched on and really gets neglected. But there's an amazing group called Stormwater Shepherds who are trying to get more testing and monitoring of road runoff into rivers going on. And then the sewage issue, because our population's going up and up and up, there's more pressures. So there is a lot of untreated effluent, and our farming practices, in the intensification of agriculture. So we've got different emerging threats. And I think as they've got worse in the last sort of decade or so, the cutbacks have come at the same time. So we've got less and less monitoring, less and less knowledge as new problems and threats emerge. And I know other people are worried about, and there's been lots of articles about pesticides in rivers, but also about, you know, like flea treatment for pets. There's worries about antimicrobial resistance because of, you know, the antibiotics that go into rivers. And that's its own problem. So there's so many levels of river pollution issues that I really think we should be demanding. We're talking about citizen science a lot, but really in Friends of the Upper Wye, I think we're doing it to get information that should be useful, but we're also doing it to highlight the fact that it shouldn't be up to just local people to do it. It should be statutory. This stuff should be happening, but maybe you have to show that you're willing to do it, to demand it, you know, show that you'll care about it. Or maybe local people can hook up with these agencies and the agencies can use that engagement of a community to contribute to protecting the river. That would be wonderful if it could go hand in hand with the other stuff. And on the Wye Salmon, yeah, I think it was mentioned in the chat, the Wye Salmon Association here on the Wye are taking part in some like citizen science monitoring as well. And we are like Friends of the Upper Wye are talking to the Wye Salmon people, and we're all forming a kind of network of getting more information and working together to highlight pollution in the river.
Thanks, fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Okay, I'm going to pull a few more out. So one, Nick, sorry, I know we've got quite a few Nicks. It's not showing me the last name. Is it Sherwood who's asked about biosolids? Yep. Okay, off you go. Thanks, Nick.
So I live in the middle of 150 acres of not my land, somebody else's land, in the middle of Herefordshire, quite rural. So I had a very close-up and personal experience with biosolids over the last couple of years. And of course, it's probably the case that many people still think that, well, we've already been disabused in this conversation, but lots of people still think that the other stuff that comes out of sewage treatment plants, which is not waterborne, is solids. And it's been spread all over agricultural land, all over the place, including in the River Wye SAC, because I live in the SAC. And I watched 500 tons of this stuff being chucked around on agricultural land outside my door here. And I just wonder how much knowledge there is in the panel about just, I know it's toxic. I've seen reports, there was a report earlier on this year, and I just wonder how much of an issue this deserves to be. Of course, it's not the only stuff that's getting chucked around. Phosphates and NPK and all sorts of things are being chucked around on agricultural land that's all feeding into the rivers, you know, maybe not in a matter of hours, but certainly in a matter of days.
Yeah, I can say something about that.
Yep,
sewage sludge, yes, it contains all of those things that we said couldn't be removed from the process, including microplastics, and it has the potential to cause antimicrobial resistance as well in soil. We understand some real concerns about it. You know, once you spread those microplastics around a field, you're not going to exactly have a day litter picking microplastics up, are you? That's going to be permanent damage. And there are farmers that we know that have steered well clear away from it. I think they're really wise, because people are going to be looking for unpolluted land at some point. We saw it. We saw it on Countryfile. It was the virtues were being extolled on there, and I think there's it's a typical thing that we won't recognise the problem until it's too late. Already, I think in Holland they banned its use, so the UK or Britain or somebody, imported 40,000 tons of it from them. I imagine we got it quite cheap. So we not enough to have our own to get rid of. We actually imported it. So yep, that's going to be remember this conversation in 5 or 10 years time when we're reading what a disaster it was, I would say.
Thanks, Ashley. I don't know if any of the others want to come in on that, then feel free to put your hands up. If not, there was a question. I don't know if this is for our panelists or if it's for somebody else in this room, but it's from CB. It's about Green Party policy on strengthening regulations. If anyone on the panel knows about it. Oh, CB, hi.
Hi, it's me. It's Catherine. It was just, I haven't read the Green Policy, probably should have done, but basically does anybody know whether the Green Party calls in its manifesto for a strengthening of regulators to really give them teeth so that they can do the things that we're wanting them to do? I don't know if anybody knows the answers of that one.
I mean, Simon's waving at me. Simon?
I think the Green Party policy is to bring the water companies back into public ownership and give much better powers to the regulating bodies. There's actually a draft working paper on environmental protection being discussed at the moment. I was on a web call 2 days ago about it, and strengthening the powers and the funding of organisations like Natural England and the Environment Agency, and making them more distant from government and the water companies, because one of the problems is they are all intertwined. As much as there's, like somebody said, there's great people working for the Environment Agency, they are sort of part of government. It's actually trying to make them more distant, I think, is the key point. And new policies are emerging. There's a policy fest this week and people are discussing it. So I'm here rather than going to one of those policy fest meetings. So there you go.
Well, maybe you can feedback for us, Simon, and say that we've got 100 people on a call who think that we should be strengthening those policies. Okay, next one. I don't know if Laura Sorensen wanted to come in. My note that I've made is Ecocide. I know that you've made quite a few comments, but I think it would be maybe good for us to talk about the Ecocide law. I think you put a question out about that.
Yes, I just put a comment on there. Thanks very much. It's just something that is being talked about a lot. There was a fantastic video made by Polly Higgins, who's now sadly died, but work is ongoing. And for example, Glastonbury may be one of many towns that have declared itself a supporter of Ecocide, and we've had several presentations about it. And it was on the Statute of Rome. It's not now, but there's a lot of moves to bring it back. It does make sense, because it would mean that polluters really did have to pay, not a slap on the wrist, not a fine that they can cope with, but a really severe chastisement, including prison. So that's something that everybody could sign up to promote. And it really is about the strength in numbers. I mean, there's massive groundswell of lots of people doing things on all aspects of the planet at the moment. Sometimes I get really depressed about it, but really, if I look carefully and I join in with conversations like this, I know it's going to be okay. We're going to do it. We're going to get there. The government is appalling, and they just, typical no shame, but we have to shame them. Part of Exile's values are that we don't shame and blame, but it's really hard sometimes. But you can go online and sign up to Ecocide, and you're invited to pay a little bit, whatever you can. And I think we will get there, but we just have to remain active. And yes, I believe in absolutely non-violent direct action. So get ready with your buckets of poo. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Laura. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that from our panel.
Yeah, I'm obviously a massive supporter of the law of Ecocide, but I also think that we must remember that laws and rights of nature, it's like an ecosystem, right? It's never going to be one thing that transforms it. And so Ecocide is at the very high level going to be stopping, you know, destruction of huge tracts of the Amazon rainforest, or potentially destruction of whole rivers. But I don't know whether, for instance, the kinds of pollution that we've been talking about today would be big enough to fall within the rubric of Ecocide law. And so we also need to look at things on a national and then a local level as well. And so obviously, yes, please sign up for Ecocide law and do whatever we can to make that happen, because that's really important. But let's also look at the rest of the legal ecosystem as well. And that's where local groups really can come in and make a difference, I think.
Fantastic, thanks.
And actually,
okay.
on that, can I answer directly to one question I saw in the chat as well about bylaws on the River Froome? Because actually, the council in Froome tried to get rights for its river via local bylaws, and they actually got it passed by the council, and then it was vetoed by DEFRA. So the government, even where local authority wanted to do it and had passed it, they were like, no, that's too nuts for us, we're not going to let you do it, which is indicative of the practical issues of getting rights of nature in this country. But also, that's where we then come back and say, okay, well, fine, we don't need your bylaws, we're just going to say that the River Froome has rights, and we're going to treat it as if it does. And that in itself is a powerful statement, I think.
Absolutely, thanks, Paul. Okay, I've got Liz Child. Do you want to just come in with your question about design? I think that was just a really interesting question. It might probably be for Ashley.
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Liz, thanks.
Yes, I just wanted to know if there were any recent ideas of design and anything that local groups could actually point to when they are campaigning, and any examples in the UK of redesigned sewage works.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, okay, well, most of the issues don't really require a new design. They require the actual infrastructure to be fixed to do what it was intended. The pipes need to deliver the sewage to the sewage works without being infiltrated by leaking groundwater in, or by rainwater being connected up to it, and the sewage works need to be big enough to do their job. They can be more sophisticated. At the moment, we have the kind of pour some stuff in one end and it comes out the other, and there's nothing really you can do if it starts to go wrong. I've certainly seen in Germany self-contained sewage works, sizable places where they will process the liquor, the product, and they won't release it until it's ready. So there's no it goes wrong, but it's gone into the river. There are better ways, but there's always this kind of penny pinching attitude to doing everything, of course, that doesn't save money. But and it kind of the thread runs around so many things that are being said today. Back in 2017, the World Wildlife Fund said that public concern was high, but awareness is low. And that's the point. You know about this. If you can go and tell two people and make them tell two people, that would be really helpful. That people that really start to understand how bad this is, because when you're talking about different types of action, if everybody just generally frowns in the direction of government and says, hang on a minute, this is not what we signed up for. We expect our environment to be treated with respect. We want to be able to go and walk by a river, have our kids paddle in the river and our dogs swim in it without wondering what that is going through there. When the dog goes for a drink in a stream, you don't want to walk upstream and find that that's a discharging sewage works, do you? That's got bacteria, viruses, and all the rest of it in it. It's a basic requirement. We haven't moved on. We've accepted the basic low level of post-industrial revolution rubbish, and we haven't insisted on anything else because we've been conned into thinking that it was good. And now we're taking the lid off that. And if you can help to take the lid off that and let people know what they've got, and then they know what they can have, then we'll see some changes. That's me, I'm muting again.
Thanks, Ashley. No, that's great. Okay, I'm going to bring Beth W in. One question around how do they get away with it? And then I'm going to ask one question myself and be cheeky, and then we'll have maybe a final word from all of our speakers before we hopefully sign off by 9 so that people can eat or see their children. Okay, so Beth W, are you there? If you're there, Beth, can you unmute yourself? If not, I can ask the question for you. So it was just around the regulators and how do they get away with reporting such low numbers when you guys went and did the FOI, you actually found out that it was, you know, significantly, not just a little bit more, but significantly more. And I think that, yes, Karen, okay, come in on that, Karen, thanks.
Okay, when we had the Environment Agency into one of our town meetings, we had over 100 people attend the town meeting. The Environment Agency stood up and claimed there were only 41 discharges of untreated sewage into the River Wharfe at Ilkley. They then came back to us and said there were 36. And that is because at 40, it triggers an investigation by the Environment Agency. So they said 41, oh no, suddenly it's 36, when actually it was, I think it was about 80 odd at the time, 80 odd discharges. Well, at 70, it's supposed to trigger actual action and an action plan at 70 anyway. And obviously they knew this and they've not done anything. And this had been going on for 10 years. It had not been under 70 for the last 10 years. So that our upgrade should have been 10 years ago. We've had all sorts of fobbing off from them. If you're ever investigating this, get your facts from the water companies and the environment agencies, because they will just say, oh, we've done this. Like when I mentioned all the sanitary products going into the river, well, that was because there were 20mm screens fitted. Well, in 2010, all these screens were supposed to be fitted with 6mm screens. So they says, oh, well, we'll do an upgrade and we'll put the 6mm screens in and we'll do this, that and the other. Well, they should have done that 10 years ago. So basically, just don't believe a word they say. Get your facts and make sure you get these freedom of information requests. Don't believe a word they say, honestly.
Absolutely, thanks, Karen. I think that might be the quote of the session, if I'm honest. Okay, I'm just going to ask one question myself, which is around climate action networks. So obviously climate action networks are being set up around the country in different areas. And, you know, I'm a member of one, I'm a local town councillor and I'm a member of our climate action network. And rivers, it's not on the agenda, if I'm honest. You know, we're doing air quality pollution tests, we're doing these, that and the other. But I think, you know, a lot of these networks now have a small budget, and I think, like you guys were saying around testing, getting citizens to test rivers and stuff, should that be something that as the Green Party were promoting and telling climate action network groups to do, if there's not a Friends of the River group already doing it, sort of thing, or getting them to connect with each other? And there's also some suggestions around getting wild swimmers involved and a whole load of stuff going on in the chat. But I think, you know, we're all on a similar agenda, and we should be connecting maybe a little bit better and helping each other to do this. So any comments? Thanks, Karen.
Because I'm part of the Wharfedale Naturalist Society, Friends of Ilkley Moor, Climate Action Ilkley, we've got Wharfedale Tackles Plastic. You need to link up with other groups, which is what I've probably been best at out of the group. I saw Russell Briggs on here, I've linked up with Ashley. I know Paul Powlesland from Twitter. I'm working with Climate Action Ilkley on doing balsam bashing and getting people to increase biodiversity by tackling invasives, and getting a team together to work on this throughout the summer and take the balsam down. You need to connect with as many groups as possible. We're in touch with the Surfers Against Sewage. We're in touch with the open water swimmers. Everybody we're in touch, very much in touch with the Rivers Trust, are fantastic. So you need to get into contact with all these people, and we all need to join together, because together we're stronger and we get more done.
You're totally right there, Karen. Okay, Nicola, come in on that.
Just to say as well, on the citizen science side, there's another group called Freshwater Watch, which we haven't mentioned, but like the Rivers Trust, Freshwater Watch can supply citizen science kits. So if you're looking for like phosphate or nitrate testing, if that's the issue, then they just do very cheap single-use kits. But so they've done things like a Thames water blitz. So like annually, they'll ask volunteers to go and test the water on their stretch of the Thames, and they get like a snapshot of the health of the river. And they're looking, you know, they're working with different groups and community groups around the country. So some people go through them because they already have an app, and it's like one way of doing it. But I think there are other ways, and I think the Rivers Trust nationally are developing a kind of citizen science programme. But certainly Freshwater Watch are kind of in touch with the Rivers Trust. So they're just another group to kind of have on your radar if you're looking at citizen science.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, there is still so much going on in the chat, and I do just want to touch on a few things. Loads of amazing charities and organizations that are doing amazing work. I know that some people were asking around like wet wipes, why are people using them, why are people putting them down the toilet? I mean, we can't answer that, I don't think, but there's a charity called City to Sea that one of our friends within Stroud District Green Party works for, and they're doing fantastic work on raising awareness about not using, you know, there's alternative things to wet wipes now that are reusable that you can put in your washing machine. So have a look at that. They've got some great work. There's also Michelle put her email address in, so if you can't get onto the Bathing Water Hub, then contact her and she will help you. I think Philip Booth had asked a question about that. He was struggling to get on. Loads of amazing stuff. There's loads of consultations going on. Message your MP, tweet about it. You know, like everyone's saying here, basically the power is in our hands, and we just need to get involved and talk to each other more. Okay, so I'm going to invite sort of 2-minute roundup from each of our speakers. So just sort of your final thoughts or any suggestions or anything that you can offer us, and that would be great. And then if Nicola, you want to do any final words, take a little bit longer, and then we should be almost finished on time. And yes, the recording will be available, and all of these links will be copied into the space in our YouTube channel as well. So let's go to Paul first.
I thought I was going to be last, like in the other one. Oh no, you. Yeah, I want to reiterate that as challenging as it all seems, and indeed is, you know, there are multiple problems, and it does look very daunting. At least I don't want to say the power is entirely in our hands, because obviously it's not. There's a lot of other organisations and institutions that have a role to play, but the power to begin enacting change is within our hands, and it's within each of us to go and spend some time with your local river, watch it, observe it, see how it changes in the seasons, and begin to love your local river, and then set up, if you can, or get involved with a group to help to restore it and to protect its rights. And also, actually, I didn't really say this in my talk, but the other thing that I think could be quite interesting is actually drafting out the rights that you think the river should have. So we don't have to wait for Parliament to give us rights to rivers. We can draft them out. So we can draft a declaration of what rights we think the river should have, and then begin to uphold those now, in the here and now, whether it's taking the rubbish out ourselves by political campaigning, or, as I mentioned earlier, by some slightly more Aggie direct action. And I think if as many rivers as possible in this country had people that loved them, that set up groups to protect them, and drafted rights that they pledge to uphold as best they can, I think that would make a massive difference.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Paul. Okay, let's go to Ashley.
Okay, well, a river's a moving body of water. All you've got to do is stop wrecking it. It recovers really fast, as you've seen from those heavily polluted rivers of the Industrial Revolution. I've seen it this year in the River Windrush. We've had really heavy rain, and the dilution issue is a big one. So just after the big floods, the river got its sparkle back again. It was beautiful. I've been to the upper reaches of the river, which are untouched, and you do get a seriously great idea of what that river could be like and once was like. And the other thing is, I've been doing this now for about 4 years, and we started off with people looking at us as if we must be crazy to be saying that that could even be happening in this country. Now it's starting to become more mainstream. There's never been a better year. We've seen so much change in the last year, despite all the COVID distraction and everything. Things have moved on massively, thanks to people like Karen and the Rivers Trust and everybody else, everyone chipping in. It is in our hands. You don't have to live in a wrecked environment. Sometimes you've got to make a few sacrifices. You've got to pay a bit more money for something. You're gonna get a massive benefit from it. Just believe that, and really just spread that word, and we will see a change in the next 5 years. We will see a massive change.
Thanks, Ashley. Fantastic presentation. Okay, Karen, let's go to you next.
Okay, well, what scientists do when they're looking for life on other planets, the first thing they look for is water. Without water, there's nothing. And throughout this whole campaign of all this sewage going into our rivers, one thing I've been thankful for is that we do have a river. In parts of the UK, these rivers are being sucked dry by over abstraction, while all singing, all dancing, super desalination plants are just lying empty, unused on the banks of the River Thames. And when those rivers dry up, not only does it dry the aquatic environment up, it kills the whole of the ecosystem around it that relies on that water. So there are parts of the UK that are in very real danger of running out of water entirely, or all the flow in the rivers just being untreated sewage and sewage going into it, basically open sewers. So we really need to take this issue on, and we really need to do something about it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Karen. And your story is really the perfect example of how communities can do that. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Nicola, okay, if you'd like to have the final words.
Mainly, I just want to thank the three speakers because they've been brilliant, and I'm so grateful that they could join us tonight. So thank you very much, Paul, Ashley, and Karen. Yeah, I'm inspired again by all of your words. And Ashley really does have a forensic knowledge of water companies, and with Windrush, he has been for years with colleagues tracking, the outfalls to see what the reality is versus what the water companies say. So I would just say, yeah, hopefully there'll be more friends groups forming around the country. That's definitely an idea we're going to push with Riverside, because we think it's a really powerful one. That actually, as Paul says, if you go and spend time near your river and you observe it and you be with it, you'll see the things to rejoice in, but you'll also hopefully find where that pollution's coming in. And when you do see pollution, please report it whenever you see it. I was walking by a river the other day and I photographed loads of dirty water coming off a farm and sent it into the Natural Resources Wales. So basically always report pollution to the agencies when you see it, because that raises the stakes, but also promote it on Twitter and social media and share videos, because that's what Karen did and that's what Ash does, and it's really powerful because local people are shocked to see sewage pouring into the river, and unless they see it they don't really believe it or know it's there. So we've got all these tools now to kind of democratically share this knowledge. And on Riverside, we will be collating some of the most egregious examples of river pollution. So yeah, if you have your friends groups, please contact me, Twitter, email, anything, and send us stuff, because we are going to feature examples around the country and try and really spotlight this with George kind of going full power on it. That's it.
Fantastic, amazing. Thank you so much, Nicola, and thank you so much, Karen, Ashley and Paul, for taking the time out and coming and joining us on this Cloud Cafe. We really appreciate it, and we've absolutely kicked off the year with a bang. Feel free to keep an eye on our upcoming sessions, because hopefully there will be equally as important discussions that that we want to keep having. This is the whole point of the Cloud Cafes, is that we spark these conversations in the community, and now a whole load of people are going to go off and talk to their friends about it and talk to other people, and that's how these conversations become mainstream, just like Ashley was saying, and get into our thing. And that's where, you know, people start getting involved and taking action. So you know, like Paul said, people will only love that which they know, and they will protect that which they love. And I think that is a really beautiful thing. So go and get to know your rivers, go and get to know your environments, and start to love them. And I think once we do that, we'll all start, you know, appreciating it all a little bit more. And maybe all of our rivers can get their sparkle back, which Ashley, I think, is another wonderful quote of the night. But yes, thank you to everyone in the background, Dagan, Elizabeth, who pulls these things together, Martin, I'm sure, for hooking Nicola in for us, much appreciated as well. So if everyone wants to turn their cameras on, say goodbye. It was such a lovely evening. We really appreciate seeing you, everybody, and go and tell your friends about us and invite them along next time. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you in February. Have a good evening.
Thank you.